Okay, here we go. We are mic'd up this time, so hopefully the sound will be a little better. Might be a little much. We might have some ASMR moments. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. I got my Coke Cherry Zero here, so that'll be good. Keep me parched. No, no, won't keep me parched. It'll quench my parchness. Here we go. Period 3. Notes. Number 3. There we go. Okay, so we're looking at the Constitution, or the eventual evolution of the Constitution here, because the first 4 years after the Revolutionary War, they operated under the Articles of Confederation, which had its problems. So, first of all, there was some foreign problems, um, many of which, they didn't adhere to the Treaty of Paris, um, and we were the America too weak to keep Britain from maintaining military outposts in the West. So the British still had a military presence on the western outskirts of the newly founded America. There was also economic weakness. So after the revolution, there was an economic depression. A lot of that was because, we couldn't pay back the war debt. Each state was competing with each other for economic superiority. They were placing tariffs on each other, high taxes, those types of things. So all kinds of problems, which led to the Annapolis Convention, which really didn't do anything other than lead to another convention. But it all starts at George W.'s home at Mount Vernon, where they hold a conference. There's like 5 dudes that show up, and they're like, yeah, these articles have their issues. We should come together and figure it out. So they decide to come together at Annapolis. So once again, not all of the states are represented, but they decide, hey, we should probably hold some more discussion. We should do this in Philadelphia. So they hold eventually, where are you? Drafting the Constitution at Philadelphia. Okay. So they meet and they have the approval of Congress, right? To be like, yeah, you can go and revise the articles. All states but one were represented. Rhode Island didn't trust the other states, so that makes sense, right? Don't have a voice, then don't show up. And they didn't. So no Rhode Island. But the delegates, some fun facts, if you will, all white, all male. Most had a college education, and for the most part, they were far wealthier than their average American, right? So landowners had cash, rich white dudes with education. Oh yeah, there's old Howard Zinn, right? This is the part that he attacks. Says, "Whoop, seems a little shady." Those are my words, not his. Okay, some of the key issues that they were looking at when they come together in Philadelphia. One, do we keep the articles and just change them, right? Revise the articles that already exist, or do we change the whole thing, scrap it, start new? Okay. And another key issue is representation. Remember, under the articles, there was one house, right? A unicameral Congress that existed. So there was all kinds of issues that revolved around this. Several plans came to be. One, the Virginia plan, which in the end would favor larger states, more representation. The New Jersey plan favors small states, kind of that equal representation. But the one that's put into place is the Connecticut plan, 2 houses in Congress, and we know that the House of Representatives is represented by population, while the upper branch, the Senate, is equal representation for all states. Okay, another big issue, slavery. Okay, so one of those issues would be, how do we count the slave population? So once it's determined that the House is going to be represented by population, all of a sudden the South is like, hey, right? We want to make sure that we're counting our slave population so we can have more representation in Congress. But yet we can't count them as one because that would be like suggesting that we're equal, and well, that doesn't work. So what they came up with is the three-fifths compromise. Each person of African descent, right, would be counted as three-fifths of a person. Another issue was the slave trade itself. And what they come away with is they agreed to allow the importation of slaves for 20 more years. In 1808, it could be revisited, and if Congress so chose, they could do away with it then. Okay, and then trade. Trade was another big issue because under the Articles, states were essentially fending for themselves. So they decided that Congress could regulate interstate and foreign trade. They could also place tariffs on foreign imports to raise some cash, but they could not tax exports. So they couldn't tax the goods leaving the Americas, heading for mostly Europe. Okay. Another big issue is the presidency, that executive branch. Do they serve for life? Some thought they should. Do they serve for terms? Should there be term limits? Like, how does all that work? What they settled on was a 4-year term limit. Okay. Let me rephrase that. 4-year terms, but in the Constitution, they did not put a limit to the number of terms. They then had to figure out, how do we elect the president? And the United States is very unique in how we do this. So essentially what they do is they assign each state electors, and it's based on the number of people that state has in Congress. The reason for the formation, because the delegates feared that too much democracy would lead to mob rule, right? We're democratic, but we don't really want people to have like too much power. That would be bad. Hey, there he is again. There he is again. Howard Zinn. That's what he's talking about. This whole idea of we call ourselves a democracy, but is it truly? Okay, the ratification process. So what they needed out of Philadelphia, 9 of 13 states to adopt. So you set up this battle, Federalist versus anti-Federalist. We won't go into depth here. One of your sheets from chapter, I don't even know what chapter we're on these days, 7? Let's go with 7. Chapter 7, one of those reading outlines has a chart where it kind of outlines, and you'll fill in the Federalist versus anti-Federalist there. But Federalists more so for, powerful central government, popular more in the Northeast. Anti-Federalists not wanting that strong central government, popular in the Southern and Western states. So this debate goes on. Federalist Papers, essays written and published in New York. Main authors, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, and they were providing reasoning for adopting the Constitution. And it eventually passes, as we know. Part of the reason they convinced the anti-Federalists to vote for the Constitution was adding the Bill of Rights, those first 10 amendments, to the Constitution. So the arguments for adding those Bill of Rights. Okay. So if you're an anti-Federalist, they felt that they needed to stop a strong central government from acting like a tyrannical one that they just fought to break away from, right? They didn't want to create a situation where the central government had too much power and the people did not. The Federalists argued that Congress was elected by the people, which was somewhat true, somewhat not. The Senate was not elected by the people at the time. And therefore, right, I mean, if you're electing the people, you would just vote them out if you didn't like what was going on. And they argued that, all rights were just assumed and protected. So why would you limit it to a list of, hey, these 10 things are what we want to protect? Ultimately, though, the Bill of Rights goes in there and it persuades many of the anti-Federalists to join. Okay, Washington's presidency. There's a little more to it than that as well. Like once they reached the 9, there was still like New York and Virginia, the two big states. Virginia was the most populated state at the time, to try to convince them to join as well. And eventually they do. The Federalists win out and get those states to join. All right, Washington's presidency. Let's see what we got here. Okay, so Constitution's put into place. The first elections are held in 1788, and then old GW takes over in March of 1789. And Washington was the unanimous choice. Most thought that was going to be the case out of the Electoral College. He was, right? And so he takes over, and he has to figure out, well, what does the executive branch look like? How does this operate? So he appoints 4 individuals. They're on the screen there. Thomas Jefferson, Secretary of State; Hamilton, Secretary of Treasury; Henry Knox, Secretary of War; and Edmund Randolph, his Attorney General. These individuals are not all on the same page, by the way. Thomas Jefferson would be an anti-federalist and doesn't always jive with Washington's policies, as we will see. Okay, Hamilton. He's like, we got to get this country on track financially. How are we going to do it? All right. So one of the biggest problems with the articles, dive into my cherry Coke here, pull the mic away. That is tasty. Okay. So one of the biggest problems with the articles revolved around finances, and Hamilton came up with a plan to be like, here's how we're going to get ourselves on stable ground. 1, pay off the national debt at face value and assume the war debt from the state. So not have individual states owing on their own, that becomes a national debt. Okay, and then paying off. So there was debt that was out there that was owed, and the face value piece of being like, well, this is what we paid. This, there was a lot of debate on what was still owed, and they just said, hey, whatever the note says, we're paying that, and it's going to be a national debt, not up to the states. 2, protect the nation's industries, okay, because he felt like, it's a young country. We're in our infancy here. We have to protect our businesses, and we need to be able to raise money at the same time. So we're going to protect those businesses by imposing high tariffs on goods coming into the country. Twofold: protect ours, raise money. Good stuff. And then 3, create a national bank. This one was the one probably that's the most contentious, that people debated about, was creating this national bank. But he wanted to be able to deposit government funds and have the ability to print paper currency, money that all states could use, that would set a stable currency, so we're not trading for different stuff and that kind of thing. The Anti-Federalists did not support this. Okay, that being Thomas Jefferson, he's the one, in the cabinet there, that's saying this is no good. He did agree with number 1, right, the debt piece, that it shouldn't belong to the state. So they kind of compromise here. And Jefferson agrees to go along with the national bank, and Hamilton, in return, agrees on the location which Jefferson wants in the South on the Potomac, which we now call Washington, D.C. Okay, so very good. Driving on. Foreign affairs. Okay, here's some stuff going on. You got the French Revolution, right? So the French helped us in our revolution, and then shortly thereafter, they have a little revolution of their own. Theirs is a little more intense, a little more classic revolution, if you will, where the general population, the masses, are assuming power, taking over. And many in the Americas sympathized with the cause, but there were some issues, right? We had an alliance, we being our government, had an alliance with the crown, but yet the crown is being threatened by the masses. And another one of those issues is Britain was seizing American ships heading for France, and Thomas Jefferson wants to get involved. He actually is, pushing for, we need to go to war, right, to kind of show that we need to be taken serious. Washington disagrees, and he says no, and he comes out with a proclamation of neutrality, and says, nope, we need to stay out of these things, that our country is too young. we are not strong enough to engage in European conflicts, right? To sail over there and try to fight. That's not a good idea. At this point, Thomas Jefferson resigns. He's like, I'm out. TJ out. Okay. And he resigns from his post. Foreign Affairs, the Jay Treaty. So John Jay, he was sent to negotiate with the British about some of those seizing of American ships and taking our sailors and forcing them into the British Navy and those types of things. And eventually he returns with a treaty, the Jay Treaty, in which Britain agreed to remove its posts in the West, didn't really address the issue at sea, but either way, they got rid of their military posts in the West. And then the Pinckney Treaty of 1795, this deals with Spain. They saw potential conflict looming. So they open up the lower Mississippi to American trade and agree to move the boundary of Florida to the 31st parallel. Yeah, none of this is eventually going to matter because we're just going to take it all. But for the time being, okay, domestic concerns. Hey, there's American Indians again. Boy, I bet it goes well for them this time. Oh, wait, no, it doesn't. Nope. Okay. Hey, buddy. Got a visitor. Okay, so settlers continued to move west into the Ohio Valley, and it's at this point some different Native American tribes. You want to say hello? Hello. Yeah, very good. Eating some stuff? Yeah. Okay. So at this point, some of those American Indian tribes, they formed the Northwest Confederacy, and they fight back against some of those people moving into the territory. The Battle of Fallen Timbers, right, is then the American Army getting involved, and under General Anthony Wayne, they defeat the Confederacy, and out of this comes the Treaty of Greenville, which opened all land in the Ohio Valley to settlement. And there's also the Western Lands, the Public Land Act that was passed that went through the procedures for dividing up and selling these new federal lands. And it went through like how to create states and all that stuff. 1791, Vermont becomes the first new state, followed by Kentucky and Tennessee. Okay, the Whiskey Rebellion. All right, so here's what's going on with this. Okay, so Hamilton, right, remember he wanted to raise some cash by imposing tariffs, high tariffs. Well, in getting his plan passed, he was not able to have his tariffs at a rate that he would like. So not as much money was coming in. So what they had to do is they passed some excise tax to get some more revenue for the government, specifically on the sale of whiskey. So in Western Pennsylvania, some farmers, right, people that were growing this, or not growing, but they were growing corn to make whiskey, they decided, I'm not paying the tax. We don't have the cash. This is silly. And they said, we're going to defend our liberties by attacking the revenue collectors. So they didn't just say no, they actually attacked the people trying to collect these taxes. So Washington federalizes 15,000 state militia, and there really isn't a whole lot of bloodshed here. It's essentially with that show of force, the Whiskey Rebellion collapses. Okay, but it creates a division. Some were like, yes, good, we can't have like a rebellion from within. And then some were like, whoa, that was a little too much by our central government, too much force against the common people. And out of this, Thomas Jefferson, remember, anti-federalist, George Washington would be a federalist, gained popularity as a champion of the Western farmer. All right. Political parties. Okay, so the Constitution does not mention political parties, but right out of the gate, right, 1780s, there's a debate between the Federalists and Anti-Federalists, and it's the first indication that the United States is going to operate under a two-party system. In the 1790s, those two parties form around two individuals. One, Alexander Hamilton for the Federalists, Thomas Jefferson for the newly founded Democratic Republican Party. Okay, the French Revolution added to this division. Many supported Jefferson and his openness to oppose neutrality, right? He wanted to get involved in these types of things. So you also have a chart there. It's this chart. I would fill it in. You may have to hit pause because I'm not there to give it to you live. So just hit pause, right? And you can kind of see the leaders, what was their view on certain issues, pro-British, pro-French, yay. Okay. Okay. Washington's farewell address. There's a quick sip of cherry Coke. Mm-hmm. Oh, delicious. Okay. Washington's farewell. This will be on the exam at some point. Whether or not it's a short answer, long answer, multiple choice, something you can reference in a DBQ. It's always usually on there. Okay. But Washington determined that he was not going to run for a third term, that his second term would be it. So he penned his farewell address with the help of Alexander Hamilton, and it went into the newspapers. And he said these 4 things, right? This was my parting advice, if you will. 1, don't get involved in European affairs. 2, don't make permanent alliances in foreign affairs. Do not form political parties. And do not fall into sectionalism. I got someone on my lap. Hey, bud.
Goodbye.
All right, see ya. See you later.
You would say goodbye to him.
No, not yet.
No,
All right. And the 2-term limit remained in effect until 1940, right? Most presidents, they just honored that. It wasn't in the Constitution. But FDR, 1940, is elected to a 3rd term. He'll be elected to a 4th term, 1944. And then in the early 1950s, the 22nd Amendment made the 2-term limit part of the Constitution. All right, John Adams, who follows up for Washington. He was a Federalist candidate. He wins by 3 votes. Okay, he wins by 3 votes. In second place was Thomas Jefferson, so he becomes vice president, even though they're from opposite parties. So hashtag tension. But that's how it was in the Constitution. Number 1 and number 2, right? 1 became president, 2 became vice president. That'll change with the 12th Amendment in 1804, and that sets up the president and vice president run as a team to avoid that tension in the White House. It's just kind of weird. All right, the XYZ affair. So here we go again, right? The conflict between the 2 groups. So American ships were being seized by the French. So Adams sends a delegation to negotiate, to be like, hey, don't do that. And then in France, the dudes were never identified. That's why they're called X, Y, and Z. But they were requesting bribes to enter negotiations. That gets back to the United States, or to the Americas, and to America. And it doesn't go over very well. Many at that point wanted to go to war with France. Adams once again refused to call, said we're too weak, too young. We're not going to do that. Hey, that's a little bit out of, that's frustrating. Okay, Adams' presidency, little stain on it, if you will. Okay, the Alien and Sedition Act. So the Federalists, under Adams, enacted laws to restrict their political opponents. Those are the 3 things that happened. Naturalization Act, right? Moving the number of years it took to be a citizen from 5 to 14, keeping people from voting. The Alien Act gave the president the right to deport aliens that they considered dangerous, and to detain enemy aliens in time of war. And then the biggie, the Sedition Act, made it illegal for newspapers to criticize the president or Congress. They would be fined or jailed if they did so. So this angered, Thomas Jefferson and those on the Democratic Republican side. They were not very happy about this. So they argued that it violated the First Amendment. Yeah, it did. Problem was the Supreme Court had not yet established judicial review. That's coming, Marbury versus Madison. So the Supreme Court was like, yeah, no, nothing we can do about it. So a couple states, Kentucky and Virginia, they passed or adopted some resolutions arguing that the states collectively came together to give the federal government its power, and therefore if the federal government is violating that pact, that they came and created, it makes that law, mixing some words, makes that law, why can't I speak? Makes the law null and void. There we go. We're almost to the end. Okay, so the election results. 1800, because of the Sedition Acts, it essentially doomed the Federalists, and 2 Democratic Republicans received the same number of electoral votes, so they came in 1-2. In the Constitution, it says in that case the House has to decide on the winner. So it goes back and forth in the House. They're debating, who are we going to do? We're going to vote. Hamilton urged the House vote for Jefferson, as he was seen as less dangerous and of higher character than Mr. Aaron Burr, who would become vice president. Which leads to the peaceful revolution. And this is known as the passing of power, because the Federalists had held the power under Adams and George Washington. And now, Democratic Republican in the form of Thomas Jefferson is taking over, but the Federalists accepted defeat and peacefully relinquished power. This becomes known as the Revolution of 1800, and it showed that the Constitution could withhold the strains placed upon it, and life was good, that hopefully it would survive. Whew, there it is, the end of period 3. Peace.